When Absalom, the eldest son of King David, and heir apparent to the throne, started stealing the hearts of the people away from his own father, the people's king, David fled from the city of Jerusalem. And those who marched out with him was really quite an army of fighting men, but also families and local supporters who followed the deposed king outside the city. But not long after he had left, peacefully walking out quickly, I assume, here comes Absalom walking into Jerusalem, taking over the authority for his father who's now gone. No bloodshed as David planned it. But don't think David just rolled over. He fought, but covertly. He fought with intelligence now, not with a sword. He sent men back into the city to win Absalom's trust and to give him really bad advice, and also to get information back to him. And it worked. You can see in the scripture some of the people who helped him. One of the first acts of Ahithophel, the turncoat, David's previous friend and trusted advisor, was to give advice to Absalom to go after David. That same night he gave the advice to take David and his men out before they could expect it and be ready. Now many sensitive figure that plan might have worked. Maybe they could have defeated David before they were ready to fight. David already had sent people back into the city, though, like Hushai, who countered the advice with his own bad advice, and it worked. This man was David's plant, his mole, his troublemaker, and it worked. He would say the opposite, like this: no, don't pursue him, stay here. It's dangerous, you might lose, then everybody would turn against you. Surprisingly, you may say, Absalom listened to that latter advice and stayed put for a time, which gave David time to flee with his army, get across Jordan safely. Not surprisingly, that's not just coincidental good luck for David. In chapter 17, verse 14, it says, the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. By the way, some of Ahithophel's first advice was taken by Absalom. And it's shocking and sad to see, but he said, why don't you sleep with David's concubines in full view of all of Israel on the roof of the palace, so you'll become a stench in David's nostrils. He did it, and it worked, sadly, which fulfilled one of Nathan's prophecies a few chapters back, if you remember. Well, Ahithophel this time, though, saying pursue David, wasn't taken. The advice was rejected, which sent him a little bit for a loop. He responded by saddling up his donkey, setting out for his house in his hometown, putting a noose around his neck, and hanging himself. Back to Absalom. Absalom becoming a problem for David and the whole area. He's the beloved son of the king, but he has to be stopped. And so David wants to frustrate him and confuse him and stop him, really beat him at his game, but not hurt him. So we come to chapter 18 of 2 Samuel, if you want to turn there, or just listen. David assembles his army for battle against Absalom's army. He divides his camp into 3 camps, his army into 3 groups. And these 3 men, trusted leaders, are going to lead them out. Except David wants to be in there too. He wants to be in the mix, leading the charge. But listen to what his men tell him in verse 3. You must not go out, David. If we're forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. You see, even as an older man now, a king without a throne, how much respect this man holds among his men. They stand in awe of his bravery. They tell him he doesn't need to die, even if they die. They adore him. They would follow him anywhere. If they cut them down one man at a time, they don't care as long as he survives. He listens to them. He answers with, I'll do whatever seems best to you, and he determines to stay back at a safe distance. He submits to them. And he determines to defeat Absalom, and he does it. They do it. He just doesn't want to hurt Absalom at all. Now that's going to be difficult to do, to beat the army of Absalom without touching Absalom, and I think everybody knows it but David. Listen to him talk to his 3 commanders before they head into battle. Verse 5. Be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. Well, you can keep reading and see how the battle takes place in the forest of Ephraim, but it spreads out, and everywhere the fighting takes place, David's forces are victorious, overwhelmingly so. The swords of David's men kill many of Absalom's men. The forest swallows up even more, and God is working to take back the throne and give it to David. But the cost of this is really going to hurt David. He just doesn't know it yet. Now, somewhere, somehow, in all of this confusion of the battle, there is a loss in Absalom's army, but we get a glimpse of what is happening with Absalom. He is somehow by himself, riding on the back of a mule, maybe secretly, maybe trying to escape the slaughter. It doesn't say that. But if he hopes to escape attention, it doesn't work. Because as he's riding along under the thick branches of this oak tree, his long, beautiful, thick hair gets caught somehow in the branches. As the donkey, or mule, rides out from under him, he is left dangling there, hanging, exposed, vulnerable, alone. One of David's men sees what has happened. He goes and tells Joab, David's general, and says, "I saw Absalom hanging out," literally. He doesn't say that, but that's what's happening. Joab thinks the man is crazy for not killing him, but he reminds Joab, "I heard what the king said. I would be crazy for killing him." Joab and his men find Absalom just as the man described, hanging there by his hair, helpless. And he does what he figures needs to be done. He kills him. He takes 3 javelins and forces it into his body as the armor bearers surround him and they wail on him, finishing the job, so the man is dead. Absalom is just hanging there dead. They take the body down, they throw the body in a pit, they cover the pit and the body with stones. Joab sounds the trumpet, they give up pursuing Absalom's now fleeing, losing army, and just like that, it seems in the scriptures, the battle's done. David is victorious. Absalom, the troublemaker of Israel, is finished, dead. The war he started is over. The overthrow of his father is unsuccessful. The text gives one more jab at the end of the chapter of this egotistical man, really in the middle of the chapter. This man who wanted to be great in Israel, who wanted to be a king better than his father, I guess. The scripture points out that he had no son to carry on his name. We knew he had some children, so somehow by now they've died. But since there is no one to carry on his name, he erects, and has already done it by now, a monument to himself, naming it after himself. So he embarrassingly has fallen, but his monument stands proudly, as the writer says, to this day. Now everyone by now is elated. I mean, the war is over. Absalom is dead. The problem is the king doesn't know it yet. There's even a question of who would take the good news to him. Who will get there first? 2 men set off on the journey. One beats the other one there. Joab knows it's not going to be good news to David when he gets the good news. So the man who gets there first says, "All is well. Praise be to the Lord your God. He's delivered up those who lifted their hand against my lord the king." Sounds like good news. David doesn't hear what he wants to hear, so he asks, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" The second man arrives. He brings him in, asks him the same question. The man gives him a similar response. To the question, it's silence. And so now he knows. Now he has his answer without ever hearing the answer. So, verse 33 of chapter 18, the king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." The news turns out to be more than he can bear. Everybody else may be rejoicing, but David is devastated. Shaken has to be an understatement. Grief has come to him and made its home in David's heart. He's lost, let's see, how many children now? 2 many. As one would be too many. And here's another. And even though this one was a stinker, to put it mildly, it's still his son, and he loved him. And maybe anybody else would say, "Good riddance. He got what he deserved." David would never say that. He didn't expect him to die. He hoped he wouldn't. He didn't want anybody to touch him. Sadly, he's gone. And as he's dead, nearly every parent would do the same thing, saying, I wish it were me. And the text makes you wonder, how many times does David say this? Oh, my son Absalom. Oh, Absalom, my son Absalom. In the next chapter, he's still saying it. Almost like if he says it enough times, it'll bring him back. Surely can't. But maybe the word will comfort me. Maybe his name, saying it, says he's not dead. And if you think maybe in the words there's some regret, I would think so too. How can you not be David and not be somehow blaming yourself for all of this? If this is where David's sin way back there led him now to this, he wishes he could take it all back. In fact, when Nathan said, you will not die, I think by now he wishes he had died so Absalom could live. Maybe that's what he's saying. And some of this had to be laid, though, at Absalom's feet. I mean, he's a grown man after all. He's not a child. He's not a baby. He knows right from wrong. He did this. He has to answer for his own sins, right? But that's not how a parent usually sees it. A parent takes the burden. A parent takes it on their own shoulders. A parent bears it, even if the child was wrong. The sins of the child, no matter how old the kid becomes, those sins fade. And what a parent sees in that moment is just my child. Now, what is David feeling? It doesn't really say. The words give us some clue. Probably lots of things. Maybe some we can imagine. Probably some we can't. Swindoll says, memories of his failed past swamped him. Guilt assaulted him. He couldn't get past his grief, caught in an emotional vortex that paralyzed him. Sometimes grief does that to you. Did you know? It's like you're in a dungeon and somebody locks the door from the outside and you can't get out. You try your best. You may even fake it, but you're still in there. Do you know what you do when bad news comes? Unthinkable news comes? You do what seems normal and right. You cry and you weep and you mourn. And you probably do that for days on end, weeks maybe, months, years. It's almost like you can't move on. You wish it were different, but it's not. You probably think to yourself, what could I have done differently so this didn't happen? And the guilt starts coming in whether you want it or not. And you start playing a cruel game that nobody wins. You lose every time. It's the what-if game. What if I had done things differently? What if I had asked sooner? What if I came sooner? What if I called sooner? What if I acted sooner? What if I prayed harder? What if I was nicer? What if I trusted more? What if I was a better parent, a better spouse, a better Christian, a better friend, a better person overall? You think of the person, the one you've lost. You remember what you used to have. You wonder if you'll ever have that again. You know life will be different from now on, and you can't seem to let that go. And probably in time you have to forgive the one who died, or the one who quit, or the one who messed up, the one who did you wrong. And you probably have to forgive yourself somehow, as if there was anything wrong with you. And maybe there was, but still. And at some point you have to keep on living, because everybody does. You put the kids to bed at night. You make dinner when it's time to eat. You get up. You go to work. You come home. You do the chores. You finish the day. You go to sleep, or you try to sleep. And you get up and you keep going the next day too. You'll watch as David tries to do this in the next chapter, and this is next week. The bad news comes to you, and what do? You get out of bed and you start another day, and you shower and you put on your clothes and some makeup, because it has to be done. You don't mean to keep crying, but you keep crying, and that's really okay, because you'll never really get over it. You just have to keep living, and that's easier said than done. Because when bad news comes, it changes everything. And I don't know how many in this audience could understand what David's going through. I certainly can't. Maybe some other people know some similar pains, not exactly the same circumstance, but still equally devastating news when it comes. Carol Kent wrote a book published in 2004. It's called When I Lay My Isaac Down, subtitled Unshakable Faith in Unthinkable Circumstances. She thinks her life was near perfect. She was married to Gene. She was held together by a deep faith in Christ. She was a gifted speaker, and churches brought her in, and other people wanted to hear what she said because she seemed to have great perspective on life. They had one son. His name was Jason, or as they called him, JP. He was a 25-year-old graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, a lieutenant on his way to his first duty as an officer on a ship anchored in Honolulu, Hawaii. And he himself was a good husband, a stepfather to his 2 young children. Carol and Jean were counting their blessings that fall day, asking themselves, can life get any better than this? But they went to bed that night expecting nothing to be different. October 24th, 1999, but in the middle of the night, everything changed with a phone call. Gene answers it, doesn't know who it is, doesn't understand at first. The news he gets and relays to Carol is this: JP has been arrested for first-degree murder of Douglas Miller Jr. You can look it up sometime and see it. That was his wife's ex-husband, and that's all they knew, but right then their worlds crashed with that news. She describes her response in this way: my feet hit the floor as I tried to get out of bed, but my legs were incapable of holding my weight. I slumped to all fours. Nausea swept over me. I began crawling toward the bathroom where I could throw up, but everything was in slow motion. I'd never experienced shock, no strength, wave after wave of nausea, dizziness. I had to remind myself just to breathe. Trying to come to terms with and say the words, my son is a murderer, is difficult, she would say. The news came out. The undeniable truth was that their son Jason drove to the Sweet Tomatoes restaurant in Orlando, Florida on a sunny Sunday afternoon in broad daylight, shot Douglas Miller 4 times, killing him. It would take longer to discover their son's motives if they could ever get to that, but it didn't change the facts. He had killed a man in cold blood. And what took even longer was their fight for the truth in their own heads and hearts, because no matter what their son had done, they had to deal with this for what it meant to be them as parents, as all parents deal with this when this kind of thing happens. Listen to the lies Gene and Carol had to battle as parents. You might hear some of these said in your head at times, as the deceiver would love for every parent to believe some of these. Number 1, I must have done something wrong as a parent, or this would never have happened. Number 2, if I had read my Bible more consistently, prayed more intensely, stayed closer to God, I could have prevented this terrible thing from taking place. Number 3, if I had been less busy, I could have fixed the problem before it got out of hand. Number 4, if I were a more perfect Christian, God would protect my family and me from such hurtful circumstances. You think King David right about now could have been and said, I could have been a better king, a better man of God, maybe a better father, maybe spent more time with my son, maybe this never would have happened. I could have been more holy and less sinful. And yes, in every way, yes, true, David. But his son, as a grown man, has to answer for his actions too, as all of us and our children and grandchildren will someday. The enemy loves to deceive and lie and destroy, and he is trying to take down David, not just Absalom. Carol writes in her book, the enemy wants us to waste our time generating anger towards others, ruminating over personal betrayals and over injustices due to sickness, accidents, and evil. He wants to destroy our ability to function productively, to disengage us from inspiring others to be Christ followers. He wants us to give up and die, or control everything around us in such a tight-fisted manner we're tied up in ridiculous knots. The most freeing thing I did, she writes, in the hours following that devastating news was to activate my brain and decide that I would not let the enemy win this round. I would choose hope. I would choose faith in unthinkable circumstances. I suspect David would have been thinking of all of the things that he could have done better. I suspect maybe, although it doesn't say it, he could have been asking, like the psalm he wrote earlier, where was God in all of this? Why didn't God do something? This is what Carol wondered out loud. Where was God on the Sunday afternoon when my son shot Douglas Miller Jr.? I agonized, God, since you're omnipresent, why didn't you give Jason a flat tire? Lord, why didn't you make his vehicle break down? You had 6.5 hours before he killed him. You could have stopped this awful thing. And while they're reeling from their own shock and pain with their own son, they're feeling deeply for the Millers too, because their son killed him. She he went on to say, in a deeply personal way, we realize that when unthinkable circumstances enter your life, there comes a point when you either stand by what you believe or you walk away from it. And over time, we choose the powerful reaffirmation. We chose. Our foundational posture in the universe was this: God was God and we were not. We were utterly dependent on Him, and if we were to continue living with a sense of purpose and passion, we knew that our only hope was in His infinite mercy and His unshakable plan for redemption, regardless of sin, sorrow, and shame. I don't know that any of you know what it's like to lose a son like David did. I don't know if anybody in here knows what it's like to be able to say these words, "My child is a murderer." But it doesn't have to be the same. Some of the pain is similar, despite the circumstances being different. So, Carol goes on to say this, and I'm almost done. I sincerely hope that nothing has happened to you as horrible as learning that your child has committed murder. But with unthinkable circumstances, comparison is irrelevant. Is what happened in my family worse or better than learning that your daughter has a terminal illness, or your spouse is leaving you, or that a disability will change the course of your plans and dreams? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is this: what will you do in response? Will you curl up in that alluring fetal position, or will you struggle on to find God, hope, purpose, and passion amidst your circumstances? What do you do when everybody else is happy and you are mourning? What do you do when everybody else is celebrating the holidays and can't wait to find out what is going to happen in the new year, and you're having trouble finding joy in today? What do you do when your child turns against you, or is taken from you, or does something you may never understand, or gets the worst possible news ever? What do you do when you're crushed under a weight that seems like it is going to really crush you to death? What do you do when you don't know where to turn and don't know what to do next? What happens when you're imprisoned in pain, or drowning in grief, or paralyzed by life itself? What do you do when you don't want to get up and you don't want to keep going, you don't even want to live? When you'd rather curl up in a ball and just keep the world from spinning? There are no easy answers here. I figure David knows there are no easy answers here. I figure David knows something of your pain more than I do if you struggle or have had something like this happen. And sometimes, like David wrote in Psalm 13, you just give your pain to God. That's all you can do. You scream out to the heavens for relief, but wonder where God went and why He's not doing something. And you still hold on to faith to move you on, even when your legs don't move. Even after horrendous circumstances, when you question God, where He is, what He's doing, why He isn't acting, still you come back maybe, hopefully, to the end of the psalm and the end of the day saying, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise. He has been good to me." I'll bet I can't calm your fears today. I can't fix your situation. It may be worse than I could imagine. I can't make it all better with just a few words or even a good story from the Bible. But could I encourage you to give it to God, whatever it is and however bad it is, and let Him handle it, because He can and He will? And nothing is beyond His redemption scheme. He is always working for the good. Even death cannot stop Him from working for the good. 1 Peter 5:6-7 says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand," that sometimes seems heavy, I think, "that He may lift you up in due time. And cast all your anxiety on Him, because He cares for you." Do you believe it? And could I encourage you to do it? Let's stand and sing this song. Come if you need to.